Joining us on this special broadcast on G20 is Mr. Brahma Chellaney. Mr. Chellaney, thank you very much for joining us on this special broadcast on G20 on Republic TV. Let me straight away begin by asking you, the Prime Minister essentially set the tone, saying what exactly is the agenda of a G20, keeping in mind that when it comes to the geopolitical tensions that one witnesses today, it shouldn't essentially lead to some sort of a humanitarian crisis, especially when it comes to, medical products or, for that matter, various other major issues. And keeping that in mind, perhaps the way forward is to bring everyone together, the consensus that has been spoken about. But as far as consensus is concerned, the last couple of meetings that have taken place, many would say that that appears to become one of the biggest challenge. Do you believe that in the days to come, in the culmination of this summit, a consensus document could become the biggest headache?
Well, first, let's keep in mind that the G20 is primarily an economic forum. Actually, it's the world's premier economic forum. But geopolitics increasingly has come into play, clouding G20 meetings. We saw that at the Bali summit last year, how the Ukraine war cast a long shadow over the G20 summit. Now, India has to play a balancing role given the new global divides. In fact, not just play a balancing role, India will have to be the bridge builder between the rival blocs that we see now. President Putin is not coming, but President Xi Jinping will be here. And we have the Western leaders, including Biden, Macron, we will have the Canadian, the British prime ministers, we'll have the entire Western bloc virtually present in New Delhi. And they will insist on some language on Ukraine. The question is the joint statement that important? What's more important is the content, the agenda for discussions, reaching agreement on core economic issues. That should be the primary focus of the G20 summit deliberations.
Mr. Brahma Chellaney, I'll just request you to stay on, because the one other aspect that I perhaps want to focus is the expansion of a G20 and how exactly is India perceived as the voice of a global South. I'll come to that in a short while from now, Mr. Chellaney, as we just put together some aspects of what we are calling how India becomes the voice of a global South. Now, India, in fact, has hosted a special virtual summit that's called the Voice of Global South Summit under the theme Unity of Voice, Unity of Purpose from January 12th and 13th. And now it was a unique initiative that envisaged bringing together countries of the global South and in fact share their perspectives, their priorities on a common platform across a whole range of issues. Now, the initiative was essentially inspired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas or Sabka Prayas, and also underpinned India's philosophy of Vasudev Kutumbakam. Now, as far as India is concerned, which is largely emerging as a voice of global South, and what significance it will essentially have on the G20 meet. Take a look at this special report.
India's G20 presidency is a watershed moment, with the country helping shape a number of global issues. Among them are the reform of multilateral development banks, the inclusion of the African Union and the focus on climate action. As a central figure taking forward the G20 this year, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has successfully ensured that India plays a pivotal role in addressing the concerns of the global South. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has emerged as its most prominent and powerful global brand ambassador. The shifting tides of global growth have brought to light a significant trend that 80% of the world's growth now originates from countries in the global south, largely attributed to their favorable demographics. India's emphasis on the region during its G20 presidency has coincided with the second year of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. The war has served as a moment of truth. It has laid bare the differences in the perceptions between the global north and south, bringing to surface long-standing underlying tensions. And by vociferously amplifying the global south's voice, India has not only spoken for itself, but on behalf of several countries representing a young, rapidly growing, assertive yet vulnerable region. PM Modi's push to include the African Union as a full member of the G20 is evident of this. The logic is conceptually sound. If the European Union, with its population of less than 450 million, can be a member of the G20, why can't the African Union, with its more than 1.3 billion population? Europe's relations with other countries in the global south are at a turning point. But with India pushing and being a voice for global south, India is becoming a testament to show itself as a confident, emerging power with the potential to shape global dynamics. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
Mr. Chellaney, the purpose of highlighting what we just did a short while back about India being perceived as the voice of a global south, many would say that perhaps in this G20 summit, if there is a game changer, or perhaps what would be taken forward is the very fact that we are also talking about the inclusion of the African Union, something that the Prime Minister has been very vocal about. We've seen what really happened in BRICS too. But do you believe for the longest time, this was an aspect which wasn't really focused on, and largely these groupings missed out those very countries which had a very important role to play?
Yes, you are right. If you look at the G20, it's largely dominated by the Western countries. So expanding it, including the countries from the global south, making it more relevant to today's challenges, that's the imperative facing the G20. The European Union is a member of the G20. Why shouldn't the African Union also be a member of the G20? The good news is that the Indian proposal for African Union's inclusion has received the support of the Biden administration. So hopefully, African Union would be included in the G20 at the New Delhi summit. But we need to make the G20 more relevant to the global challenges. What we are seeing, unfortunately, is the decay or decline of global institutions. Even the G20 no longer is playing the role that it was supposed to play. It has not lived up to its promise. And the biggest challenge is not so much expanding it, is to make the G20 more relevant to today's world. We have seen how BRICS was recently expanded at the Johannesburg summit. No objective criteria was agreed upon by the BRICS member states. Arbitrarily, 6 new member states are being invited to join from January 2024. Now, this expansion bears largely China's stamp. And the question that we need to ask ourselves, will this actually make BRICS more relevant or less relevant? In fact, the BRICS has struggled to shape a common identity and agenda with just 5 member states. Now that there will be 11 member states of BRICS, the task of forging a common identity and a common agenda becomes so much more difficult. So while G20 needs to include countries from the global south, we need to also ensure that the G20 seeks to address the major challenges that the world faces today.